Hi, everyone. So here's this old poem from the Tang Dynasty. It says, the way of the Emperor Yao came from the Buddha. So one of the ancient emperors who was a culture hero. And he bent the Yellow River. When he passed through the market from end to end, he found the sacred dynasty flourishing there. I was talking to Tess about surprise, and one of the surprises in life is how the sacred is everywhere, and whatever we're calling it, I don't really like. I don't know. Sure, sacred will do, and it's just where you blink and there it is. And she came up with this. She said, "Oh, it's the way of the Emperor Yao," and I said, "Okay, we'll call the talk that you are the emperor and you wander through. I don't know which marketplace you wander through. You wander down the road, or you wander into the coffee shop, or you wander through Costco, or you wander where you wander. You order things online, and you find the sacred dynasty flourishing everywhere, which is kind of cool. So yeah, and so I think one of the big surprises, I decided to talk about surprise because I think surprise is about disconfirming your ideas, or having a new idea, or the universe having an idea that was better than the one you were living by. And so let's consider that as the possibility right now. You find the sacred dynasty flourishing everywhere. Surprise. So kids like surprise. They do this thing with their peekaboo and stuff like that, And if you enjoy kids, you have to enjoy that. Or if you wish to enjoy kids, you have to enjoy that. And yeah, somebody was just saying to me, somebody I haven't spoken to for many years, who left the community in a huff. I had a fight with one of the teachers, not me, and left. But then called me up to say she'd been working on forgiveness, which was kind of cool, kind of fun. And I said, "Very good. What have you forgiven?" And it was like, "You," and it was so sweet. And but the thing she said, most of what when people tell you about forgiveness, usually, I don't know, usually it's kind of oh shit, but it's not really, but it's aspirational, I suppose would be the way to say it. Usually it's aspirational. There's some, forgiveness, when forgiveness is really there, you're not forgiving anyone. There's no you, no me, all that sort of thing. But mainly, but anyway, it was kind of sweet. And but the thing she said I really believed was she wanted something that I didn't give her, which is a common thing. And she wanted empowerment. I didn't give her a credential. I wouldn't give her. And she said, then I realized I didn't want it, which I don't know. I didn't believe that. But then she told me about her grandkid and how she was playing with her grandkid, and I believed that. And so that's the august dynasty flourishing everywhere in the marketplace. The sacred is appearing with the grandkid. So it's kind of sweet. And, it's always aspiration. We're working towards one of my own teachers drove me nuts at one stage, and forgiveness was very much a practice rather than an actuality. Not really forgiveness is like, can I be not mad with, can I not have this person in my thoughts? Really like that. So here's a surprise. I'm interested in surprises. So here's a surprise here. Uh, there's a teacher in the from 1622 to 93, so he lived like about 50 years, and it's translated by Norman Waddell, who's somebody we had lunch with when we were in Kyoto about a year ago. Then and there's Bankei, a guy called Bankei, who when I was still a young man when I came to discover the principle of the unborn and its relation to thought. I began to tell others about it. Whatever we call a thought is something that's already fallen one or more removed from the living reality of the unborn. We can feel that, can't we? Anything that's a thought, and I'm trying to sort it out, I'm trying to fix it, which is the problem with forgiveness is not the intention, which is good. The problem is that it's just more thoughts added to thoughts, sort of thing. Yeah. So I don't know. There's nothing really wrong with that, but it's not yet addressing the matter. And so people would come to Bankei and say things like, I'm afraid of death and what will happen after I die. And he would say things like, you're afraid of dying, but you were not born. And so it was like one of those wonderfully confusing things that people say that might actually be helpful. You were not born, you won't die, and you weren't born. And if anyone confirms that this unborn illuminative wisdom is in fact the Buddha mind and straightway lives you straightway live as you are in the Buddha mind, you become at that moment a living Tathagata, living Buddha, and you remain one for infinite time in the future, infinite eras, kalpas. And so Bankei is really good on that quality of eternity that, like, if you really stop plotting and scheming and thinking, I really have an open mind, but trying to control everybody anyway. And when we stop that, pleasurable as it is, when we stop that, suddenly infinity stretches all around us, and that's the kind of thing, right? That's the thing we like. That's the spaciousness and the blessing and the generosity of meditation. So I have a friend who comes up to see me fairly regularly, and we have these conversations, and she's really bright, and I can sort of track it pretty much and stuff. But the conversations aren't the really interesting thing. After a while, we just stop and we sit and we listen to the birds. That's the interesting. That's where it goes out into infinity, and that's the koan world. And I do have this feeling, when I first what I wrote in that blurb for this, I first noticed when I was a kid that sometimes, kids trip over the eternal and trip over infinity sometimes, and they don't know what to make of it, and I didn't necessarily make much of it. I thought, oh, there's that, and but you see, I remember seeing a waterfall, things like that, and it was great, and I could tell that something different was going on in my mind, and that I was connected to that waterfall in some way, and then I wasn't. And then later on, I started noticing this around a little bit in other places, and that was fine. But then, when I got a little hint of it, I tried to reach for it, and it took me a long time to realize that the reaching for it became a problem, and I didn't seem to be able to reach for it, and so at some stage, all my early quantum work was about trying to stabilize it. I really want it and I'm reaching for it, but I'm pretending I'm not reaching for it. It's like hunting a wild animal or something like that. And so there's a way in the mind, it's kind of a wild animal, and we're hunting, we're trying to stabilize things and stuff. And that's all right. I like that. But but it's still a wild animal, and you're reaching for it. What you have really is the reaching. There's a famous koan that says, "I'm reaching for the light, please help me." And the teacher says, "Forget about the light, give me the reaching." So it's in the reaching. There's some stage, I don't know, I did this enough, or I don't know, I got old and stupid or something, that it started being there anyway, whether I reached for it or not or something. And so, this wonderful, I thought, oh, like, getting up in the middle of the night to go get a glass of water and walking down the hall in our house, bumping into whatever's on the wall, like paintings on the walls. It's rather kind of fun. So walking down the hall to get water from the kitchen, and suddenly it's all around me. Infinity is really here, and I just really like that. It comes to us, we don't come to it, and so I think that's what. If you want to meditate, that's what happens in the end. It just surrounds us. And you'll notice it in sounds sometimes. There's a lot of, I was just noticing how many of the old stories have somebody heard a sound and then they became fully present. They woke up when they heard a sound. Like one of my friends was coming back from a zendo. I was in a deep place, but nothing special. I was driving through a really bad area of Los Angeles, and the radio was on. There was a soap opera, and somebody in the soap opera, somebody shot her rival. "If I can't have him, nobody can." Bang, bang, bang. And that bang, bang sort of was this huge awakening experience for her, which I thought that was pretty good. And you get a lot in the old stories. The bang, bang is often provided by a cock crowing, because it was one of the sharp, loud, surprising noises. I have another friend who's on here now who's hearing the train whistle in Santa Barbara. That Pacific line that goes up by the coast. The train, that melancholy, loud, surprising sound. So those kind of things happen, and I don't know. I guess I like it. What else do we have here? This is an old medieval Japanese story. Esan concentrated deeply on Zen. She called on the teacher Tetsumon for instruction and was unremitting in her meditation. One day during morning sitting, she heard the crow of the rooster and her mind opened. She said, "The fields, the mountains, the flowers, and my body too are the voice of the bird. What is left that can be said to hear?" So that's the kind of thing, right? Sound is good like that because we become one with the sound, and we become one with the universe, with the sound. So most people have had that experience to some degree. Here's a kind of something that was surprising to me. I read this this is a biography of Wallace Stevens, the American poet. And Stevens is sort of, I don't know, he's an interesting poet, and many people are highly annoyed by him, but other people adore him. So it's that sort of thing. Common with good poets, but here, the thing was how, and he was a vice president, I think, of the Hartford, Connecticut Hartford Insurance Company, which probably still exists. But and people would come on poetry pilgrimages, and he'd meet them in his stuffy business suit, and he'd walk around Hartford and point out the building and say, "That building cost so much, and it was bought by this bank from that bank." Things like that. I'm like, he was just like one of those Zen masters who refuses to talk about Zen. And but then he always went away in summer, and he went down to Florida or Cuba or a place like that. And his young Cuban poet friend, Jose Rodriguez Feo, for whom admittedly, says the biographer, he played down the Puritan. He seemed not really American, or not your average North Americano. And the guy said, to the Americans, anything that is joyful for itself, for instance, sex or enjoying a meal, wine in itself, they don't consider that to be completely good. And so I suppose Zen would be, it's completely good. If you're doing it, it's completely good. So there's some added disapproval of relaxation or something. Fair calls Stevens the poet of the enjoyment, in the sense that those realities that he speaks about, for instance, when he talks about fruits, or when he talks about pictures or looking at something in nature, those are the things that make life enjoyable. He was always going to fruit stores to buy things. You know, he does it like watermelons and things like that feature largely in his poem. Well, that was a kind of surprising amiability in Wallace Stevens. So, sometimes, you know, I think you just have to know what it's like to fall into reality, and then you'll fall out again. But then what meditation's for is it makes that more likely, but also after a while you realize you can't really fall out, and so it's always with you. That's a beautiful thing, to know that the great world is always holding you. The Tao is holding you. Even dying, you don't fall out of it. And so you stop being afraid. And I think that's the nice thing. And then you'll get fussed about something. People, you know, there are all sorts of things to have fusses about, you know. And but after all, they don't really matter, and they fall away. And so, and you can tell when you're fallen out of the world of Buddha nature because you're indignant about something or whatever. If you're indignant about something, you know, possession is the good word, you know, the good Jungian word. You're possessed by the demons, even especially if you're right. So, like that. And but you know, it's nice when I catch that. It's nice when I catch myself being that way, possessed by the demons, and then suddenly, when we notice, suddenly we're not. You know, we're not enraged about how we were treated, or that person didn't get what we said, or whatever it was. The nun Mujaku, this is a famous Zen story that you know taught a lot, and probably people are going to do a koan salon pretty soon. They'll probably teach this. The nun Mujaku, whose lay name was Chiono, was a woman of Akita who married and had a daughter. In 1276, when she's 34, her husband died and she could not get over the grief. She became a nun and trained under Buko. The story is on the evening of the 15th day of August, when she was filling her lacquer flower bucket, where the valley stream comes down, the bottom fell out of the bucket. Seeing the waters spilling, she had a flash of insight and made a poem on it to present to the teacher. The bottom fell out of my bucket. In other words, my mind. The bottom fell out of my mind. But the teacher wasn't that impressed. And so he gave her some koans. He said, no, how about the Heart Sutra? And then, you know. But anyway, she stayed with him for many years and did the whole koan curriculum, became one of the first women who was an orthodox classical Zen master in that way, who'd done the whole curriculum. It was kind of nice. And she heard, another time she heard the cry of a deer. You know, and she fell into, the teacher said, take the Heart Sutra. She fell into the form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. It's Mujaku. And here's a poem that's sort of like, this is an interesting poem. It's an Arabic poem translated by Robin Creswell, Iman Misal. And it sounds like a Kavafi poem, where, in Kavafi's poems, they're always arguing in the palace about who's right and who's perfect and who's good. And, people are just having their life in the wine shops or wherever it is, trying to pick each other up in the cafes. This is called a celebration. The thread of the story fell to the ground, so I went down on my hands and knees to hunt for it. It was at one of those patriotic celebrations, and all I saw were imported shoes and jackboots. Once on the train, an Afghan woman who'd never seen Afghanistan said to me, "Triumph is possible." Is that a prophecy, I wanted to ask? But my Persian was straight from a beginner's textbook, and she looked while listening to me as though she were picking through a wardrobe whose owner had died in a fire. The phrases, a wardrobe whose owner had died in a fire. Let's assume the people arrived en masse at the square. Let's assume the people is not a dirty word, and we know the meaning of the phrase en masse. Then how did all these police dogs get here? Who fitted them with party-coloured masks? More important, where is the line between flags and lingerie? Anthems and anathemas. God and his creations, the ones who pay taxes and walk on the earth. Celebration, as if I'd never heard the word before, as if it came from a Greek lexicon in which the victorious Spartans march home with Persian blood still wet on their spears and shields. Perhaps there was no train, no prophecy, no Afghan woman sitting across from me for 2 hours. At times, for his own amusement, God leads our memories astray. What I can say is that from down here, among the shoes and jackboots, I'll never know for certain who triumphed over whom. It's kind of the perfect Kavafi poem. It's kind of so very touching to me. And so the other thing is that we'll notice death is all about us, like I don't know if any of you knew Steve Silberman, who was a tech journalist and Buddhist, who was an interesting guy, and he wrote the whole notion of neurotribes. I don't know that he invented it, but he popularized it because he felt himself to be one of the somewhere in the neuro world, neurological spectrum world. And he just, his partner put something on Facebook saying he just kind of woke up dead. He just woke up and his partner and Steve was dead. And people were, I've always dropped the pad of paper I need. And and it just touched me. Like I remember talking to him, sitting with him, and I don't know that it changes my idea of him. I'm still able to talk with him, sit with him. I didn't know him very well, but it's something about we live longer than we did, perhaps. I don't know if that's true. I think so, but we're not going to live forever. So that's one of the Zen things is like, well, is what you're worried about considered against the aspect of eternity? Is it important? Is the fact that you think somebody wasn't polite to you or they weren't considerate or whatever, but maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe they were and you got it wrong. Maybe, who knows? Maybe it was a good thing anyway. So, and in that line, I just thought I'd read this without comment. I'll just read this koan. Famous koan, Dao Wu, and this is a Chinese koan, and Chen Yuan. Okay, the two teachers went to a house to make a condolence call. Yuan, who was the senior student, hit the coffin and said, "Alive or dead?" With a kind of big stick. Well, not a big stick, but presumably with a Zen stick. Alive or dead? Hit the computer screen with a stick and said, "Alive or dead?" And his great teacher said, Dawu, his great teacher said, I won't say alive, and I won't say dead. You have to enter the, you have to enter the moment yourself. Why won't you say? And the teacher said, I won't say. And halfway back, so as they were returning from the funeral visit, which had been interrupted by this outburst, then Yuan said, you must tell me right away. If you don't tell me, I'll hit you. And Wu said, you can hit me, but I won't say. And so Yuan hit him. Boom. Later, not as a result of the blow, but later Dao died. And Yuan had to, having hit your teacher, he couldn't go, that meant he couldn't go home to the temple anymore because people disapproved of that. So he just went off, had to go off on his own. But then after the teacher died, he went to one of the teacher's great students and brought up the story, Shi Shuang. And Shuang said, I won't say alive. He jumped into the story himself. I won't say alive. I won't say dead. Why won't you say? I won't say. I won't say. And at these words, Yuan suddenly got free, suddenly had an insight, and which was kind of nice. And I won't say. And that I won't, the no, the putting up the barrier is such an important part of Zen. Having the barrier. The barrier is what happens when we die. I won't say. Does the dog have Buddha nature? No. All those impasse things, they're in a way what we need to have a surprise, to come into the surprise. Later, the story went on, so I might as well tell you the rest of it. That's the important. I won't say. And he had an insight. But then he stayed training. He stayed in the training temple with that teacher for a long time and became one of the people who ran the temple. And one day he took a hoe into the teaching hall and crossed back and forth from east to west and west to east. And the teacher said, Shuang said, what do you think you're doing? He's walking in with a garden hoe. And he said, I'm searching for the sacred bones of our late master. And Shuang said, the great waves, the vast ocean waves, spread far and wide, white caps flood to the sky. What else? What other relics of our sacred master are you seeking? And then Yuan said, oh, this is good for my practice. And then somebody else commented later saying, the late master's relics are still present. But then you can tell how the nice thing about the Blue Cliff is there was a whole bunch of people practicing kind of more or less near each other, and so they all made kind of peanut gallery comments on each other's. There's rather wonderful comments on each other's, teasing and playing. But they're talking about the great things: life and death, love, sorrow. Here's Jimenez, Juan Ramon. I am not I am this one walking beside me whom I do not see, whom at times I manage to visit, whom at times I forget. The one who remains silent when I talk, the one who forgives, sweet when I hate, the one who takes a walk where I am not, the one who will remain standing when I die. So there we have it, eh? And here's, this is Anna Sevilla, which is the same kind of theme, but a Polish poet. Beach sandals. I swam away from myself. Do not call me. Swim away from yourself too. We will swim away, leaving our bodies on the shore like a pair of beach sandals. That's the eternal nature of things. Okay. I don't know, surprises. Tess, you got anything to say about surprises? Mm-hmm. Or surprise us by not talking about surprises?
I really liked your phrasing of an impasse is what is needed to have a surprise, which is like predicament koans in a nutshell, I guess. But I just really liked that phrasing of it. And this morning I happened to be talking to someone who was there's a whole genre of activities in her life. Usually it starts with things like, I don't know, cleaning her house or paying her bills, but now it's started to leak into tasks at work and all these things. But there's a whole genre of activity that she just can't even bear to consider doing. And to the point where it's actually started to just take over her entire life, not doing these things. And even thinking about it just creates and we were talking a lot about just that feeling that because she's started to want to do all these things to go around it instead, like maybe I can just feel really good about the fact that I'm terrible about these things. Yes, that helps, but it still doesn't mean that you're facing them. And we were talking about how this is true, it seems like in all the old stories too, that until you do the thing that you just think you can't possibly can do, and it can be such a tiny thing, like just sitting down to pay a bill, or just washing a dish in the sink, or just calling someone that you think, no, I can't, or whatever it is. And it always is very specific and individual to you, the thing that you just think you don't want to or can't do, but something magical happens. Like she was able to do one tiny thing for 15 minutes a day. She started doing one tiny thing, and she said her whole life just started to flood with energy and, happiness over incredibly silly things like a bee on the ground that she's just so happy to see. And that it just seems like it's like in the old fairy tales where the really ugly, horrible toad has swallowed the jewel, and you have to face the horrible, ugly toad in order for it to cough up the jewel. That whatever that is, whatever your particular impasse is, seems to be the fruit of everything. So I don't know. I was just thinking about that and how both in little and big ways, life just seems to be doing that over and over and over and over and over and over again, and that becomes practice, and it seems to get a little less hard, but you still have to do it over and over and over again. So that's what I got. You're muted. Surprise.
Good. We can't. We can't. Thank you. Surprise. I just like talk. We can't, without an impasse, we can't really make any progress. We can't really deepen, and our hearts can't open. So, excellent. John Joseph, do you have anything to say about surprises or impasses? Or
well, I was surprised and pleased to hear you read the Emperor Yao poem. I read it myself a couple of weeks ago, and I looked up his life story, and when you were reading it, it made me think of his quality as an emperor. There were big floods, and people had died. I think it was the Yellow River or something. And it was such a disaster that he offered to quit, to resign his emperorhood or whatever, emperorship twice, and they wouldn't let him resign. And then because he was able to unify the people, this unified to experience this marketplace, he was able to straighten out the Yellow River and stop all the floods and save people's lives, and became one of the great emperors of China. But what really impressed, what made me think about in his life was giving up this need to be an emperor, and how it's curious, but it's kind of surprising. But when I give up the need myself to be the emperor, to be a good mate, or to be right in an argument, or to be a good teacher, or anything like that. It's kind of like what you alluded to a couple times, which is that when we give up this need and this idea and this thought of what we should be, in a way, everything comes flooding, everything comes towards us, and the gifts are surprising and wonderful. So Emperor Yao.
Very good. Thank you. George Foy, you got anything you want to say?
Hi. Well, just about surprises. I always wish I had more in my life, but of course you can't look for them. It's sort of a contradiction in terms. But one happened to me recently, out of the blue. It's not a very consequential one, but my daughter was over at her mother's doing a lot of laundry, and where I work, so I went over there to see her and opened the door, and she had a big armload of laundry. And she had dropped a sock. So I picked up the sock and I went to put it on her load of laundry. And she said, "No, Dad, I've got enough." And I said, "Well, it's just a sock." She said, "No." She was basically telling me, leave me alone. I'm doing my thing. So I said, "Fine." And I put the sock on my head. And she looked at me with great pity and said, "Oh, Papa, you poor bastard." Anyway, we forgot about it for a while. And I had to go to the bathroom, and I opened the bathroom door, and I got the shock of my life because there was this tall fucker with a sock on his head hiding in the bathroom mirror, and scared the hell out of me. And of course, just for an instant, but for an instant, it was anything was possible, and everything was really quite funny. And and I told my daughter about it, and she looked at me with even greater pity.
She's a tough crowd to play. Okay, thank you, Alison.
Let's see, there we go. Well, I was thinking about when I first started sitting, and one of the great surprises, I had no idea that this was going to had anything to do with Zen or meditation, as I started to notice that particularly notice this when I would listen to the radio, that I would listen to the news, and then my usual, there would be some news story that would come on about some country and some conflict, or some political leader, or some current outrage of something. And my usual response of "those bastards," or "I'm on this side," or "why don't they?" It just didn't appear. There was just nothing. But it wasn't indifference. There was a surprise of space. There was all this space in my mind, and it was almost like, you go to the refrigerator to get some milk or some snack, and you open the refrigerator, and then instead of food, there's just all the expected food. There's just the sky and clouds and space, and there's all this space, and there was all this space in my mind that I had, and then nothing fixed, and it wasn't indifference, and it wasn't forgiveness or equanimity, and it wasn't also refusal to be a part of things. It was just space, just openness, and it was a kind of intimacy that was like, I was thinking about the way octopus will sort of feel with their tentacles something. It was almost like I was feeling a situation that formally I had, come to some decision. So that was just a marvelous and curious thing, because I had no idea that I just thought my opinions were right. I mean, I thought any idiot would have the same opinions as me. But it turns out my opinions were, it's like the not saying, the teacher, I had someone in me, they wouldn't say dead or alive. They wouldn't say right or wrong. It was simply, I was thrown back into my situation. And this happened to me recently, where I'm going on a backpacking trip into the High Sierra. I'm leaving on Wednesday with one of my sisters. I have 5 sisters, and this is one who's 1 year older. And we've been planning this trip for about a year since I had a hip replacement. And now I actually can hopefully go backpacking in the High Sierra. And then we have one of my other sisters who's 1 year younger than me. She's been living in Japan for the past year, and she recently moved back. My older sister and I, who are going backpacking, hadn't told our younger sister that we were going. We did not invite her. We didn't think of inviting her because she was in Japan. But recently she moved literally a stone's throw from my house, and she happens to have September free. And I was speaking to my older sister last week, and we both realized at the same time that we had not invited the other sister, and neither one of us had told her about it. So this question comes up of the mind. I notice my mind will at times have, I open the refrigerator and there's, you're a bad sister, you should invite her, or she's a bad sister, why, of course we wouldn't invite her, she'd be so noisy on the trip, or etc. So I'm going back and forth. My sister also, her mind is just filling with stuff, and then space is opening up, and the sense of the surprise of whatever is in my mind, whether it's the constraint or the open space. And so we still haven't told her. We'll see what happens. I'll keep you informed.
So if you just look at something, a little exercise for us, if you just look at something in your room is your temple. Whatever you look at, that's evidence of the sacred dynasty flourishing. And look at something you kind of think, oh, I don't know, I don't like the color of that wall, or what, look at something you want to change. That's also the sacred dynasty flourishing. Not only all Buddhas have Buddha nature, all interior decorating ideas, all features of the universe are pure and real. Michelle, you got anything to say about surprises or anything else? Overcoming the impurities of the world, which are so annoying.
So I thought I might have something to say about barriers. And then Tess and JJ and Allison were also speaking about barriers. Anyway, all sorts of things were going through my head, and all of a sudden, I was really surprised that I had something else to say. And here it is. So this is a suggestion of something to pay attention to. When you are struck by some bit of advice or wisdom that you want to convey to the world, to your children, your friend, that advice, it's for you. And that's sort of a cliche, but my suggestion is, like, really pay attention to it. What is coming up that you think needs to get out there? And what would it take if you took it seriously for yourself? What if it weren't just an idea, but the universe speaking to you in some way and giving you something? So that's what came to me. So there you go.
Thank you kindly. That must be it. I have to finish that book now.